Hey everybody, welcome to Board Online, Board Offline. Today we're bringing you the second part and final part in our top 20 most played games of all time as judged by the number of hours played. So in the past, most of the time when I've done these lists, it's always been by the number of individual plays, but we are looking at the number of total hours played this time to get a better idea of which games I've actually spent the most time playing as opposed to just simply gotten the most individual plays of. And real quick before we get started, if you like any of the games you see in this video, please consider clicking on the link in the description below for that game and you can purchase it there. And a little bit of those funds will go to help the channel out. So let's get right into the list. Now, real quick, a couple of corrections. Normally you see corrections in gameplay videos, but I have a correction from the last video because I don't use Excel spreadsheets that much, and I'm a little bit of, I just didn't look at what I was doing. Last time, all those games I gave you, 21 through 11, were actually 20 through 10, which means I left 21 off of that last list, and I've only got 9 games for you this time. So let's go over that real quick. The number 21 game that I left off the list last time was Terror in Meeple City, or as I have it, it's Rampage is the version I have. They changed the name after the first or second printing. It's now called Terror in Meeple City. This is a dexterity game that I've spent about 10 hours playing. And in this game, you actually set up these 3D buildings that have meeples inside of them. And the players are giant Godzilla-style monsters that are going around, and you flick discs across the board to actually move. And then when you want to knock down a building, you can actually hold the monster over the building and drop it on top of the building, and the meeples fly everywhere, and the building falls down, and then the monsters eat the meeples. Now, if a meeple falls off the board, it's a runaway meeple, and that can be bad for you. It goes onto this runaway track, and after a certain number of meeples run away, bad things start happening to whichever monster knocked that last one off. And then the scoring system is pretty cool. You have to collect sets of meeples, but then there's also special power cards and super secret special powers, and then character cards. And those all give you different ways to score, different ways to change the way your monster acts. And it's a pretty fun little game. It definitely looks really cool. It'll attract people's attention. And generally speaking, I've found that kids really enjoy playing as well as adults. So that's Terror in Meeple City, my number 21. That should have been on the last video. It's on this one now. Number 21, Terror in Meeple City, or Rampage if you're lucky. Okay, next up for number 9, we have Mechs Vs Minions. Now, this is a game, the only board game Riot Games has put out. Riot Games up to this point had only done League of Legends, the video game, and Mechs Vs Minions is set in the same universe as League of Legends. You play one of 4 different Yordles, which is kind of a mechanically inclined race in League of Legends, I guess. I've never played the video game, but in this game, it's a cooperative game, it's a programming game, and basically you are one of 4 Yordles that have gone to mech pilot school. So you're learning to pilot mechs, but when you're there, of course, terrible things start happening. These guys called minions come, attacking the academy or whatever, and you have to fend them off. Literally 100 minions come in the game. And so, and they're very easy. An individual minion is very easy to kill. They swarm you though, and that's where the difficulty comes in. Is there's just so many of them on the board at any given time. And there's, I believe, 10 different missions. I have not played all the way through the game, and every mission introduces some new rules and has different objectives for how you're going to win. And so far, I have been very intrigued with how this goes. Oh, I didn't tell you, I've played this approximately 18 hours is how much time I've spent playing this game. So Mechs vs. Minions, though, the reason why I haven't gotten all the way through it after playing that many hours is because I've introduced it to so many people. And every time you introduce it to somebody new, you kind of want to start at the beginning. At least I feel like that's the best way to do it. And so because of that, I have not gotten all the way through. However, I am soloing it. And I've got four campaign missions up right now on the channel. So if you want to take a look at those, you can. And I'm hoping to get the 5th one out pretty soon as well. But it is a beautifully overproduced game that is very reasonably priced for what you get in this game. It has massive tiles, super colorful artwork, and the 4 minions the 4 Yordles that the players play as are all pre-painted. The minions are not necessarily pre-painted, but they do have a wash on them, so there's some nice shading on them just a little bit so that they're not just plain plastic. And there is one other mini that comes in the game that I'm not going to tell you about if you don't know about it yet, because it's kind of in a sealed box, and so you'd probably want to discover it on your own. That is also pre-painted that comes with the game. All of that comes together to make this programming game where you're drafting cards in between every round and slowly programming your mech to do what you want it to do. And that program stays with you. You don't wipe the board clear after every round. You keep that programming and have to build on it and build on it. So by the end of each game, your mechs might be super powerful and just wreaking havoc, but you also have to do it in such a way that you can complete the objective and not just be going all over the board. Because it's a cooperative game, the fact that programming sometimes will lead to unexpected consequences is usually hilarious rather than infuriating as far as I'm concerned. I feel like it at least has some pretty funny consequences sometimes when you accidentally bump your ally in the game and knock them off track of where they're trying to go. Anyway, that's Mechs vs Minions from Riot Games, my number 9 most played game with 18 hours. So moving on to number 8, we have Mansions of Madness 2nd edition, which shows up with 22 hours played. Now, I told you before in the last video, Mansions of Madness 1st edition is a game that is largely responsible for getting me into the hobby. The 2nd edition, when I saw that was coming out, I was so incredibly excited. This is a fully cooperative game. So unlike the first one, which was a 1 versus mini game, this is a cooperative game where everyone's playing against the game. And there is an app that controls all the monsters and controls all the events that occur in the game. It is a game that, especially the first time you play a mission, everything's a mystery, because unlike the first edition where the entire map was laid out ahead of time, in this one you are discovering the map as you go. You'll go to the edge of a map or edge of a tile and click the correct whatever button on the app, and then it'll show you what the next room is, and you place that one out. And so the map slowly unfolds in front of you, and it will change a little bit from game to game. Each mission has a couple of different layouts. It's not a massive difference, but just like in the first edition where certain things could change so that you weren't playing exactly the same thing every time you played the same mission, it's the same thing here. Generally speaking, the same thing's going on. You're going to get the same objective and that sort of thing, but you might have to discover it in a different way. A number of different investigators. If you have the first edition, you can bring that into the 2nd edition. They have a way of converting everything or a lot of stuff over: the tiles, the investigators, the monsters. And so this all winds up in one of my favorite solo games to play, and this is one of my favorite games to bring out for friends that are a little bit gaming inclined but maybe just have not really gotten into board games. It's probably a little too much, maybe too much for a completely new person into board gaming, but the fact that it's cooperative definitely helps with that, because you're not competing against each other and you can kind of help each other along. So that's Mansions of Madness 2nd edition, a fantastic cooperative / solo board game with 22 hours, my number 8. And my number 7 is a game that I have recently started really enjoying playing solo because the expansion allows you to do so. This is Xayah, Legends of a Drift System. Now the expansion is called Xayah, Embers of a Forsaken Star, and those two pieces combined, the base game with the expansion, create a absolutely phenomenal game. I really liked Xayah without the expansion. It is phenomenal with the expansion. Now, there are very few games that I know of that are so dependent on dice rolling as this one. Everything you do is a dice roll, including movement. However, in the expansion, it's added some stuff to really help significantly mitigate the dice rolling for movement, which is really cool. There are these little Well, basically, so when you're playing the game, you've got your spaceship. It's a space exploration game. You got your spaceship, and you've got this card where you start putting outfits such as missiles, blasters, engines, shields, all that stuff on that card. And those were the 4 outfits that came in the base game. With the expansion, they have additional outfits that are such as, what's it called? I can't remember the name of the outfit for the engine, but it's one that you place near the engine, or I believe next to the engine. I don't believe it goes on the engine. Pretty sure it goes next to the engine. And it increases your dice roll whenever you roll for that engine. So you can actually effectively make it so your engine always blasts at full capacity whenever you activate the engine. It has, so not only can you play with other players, but then there are NPCs in the game as well that add some wrinkles to what's going on. You've got missions, you've got, you try to do a merchant strategy where you're going around and trading goods from one planet to the other. There's all these different things. It has an economy board so that if you find a real good trade route, you might run that trade route dry though, and then you've got to go figure something else out. All these things, and that's something from the expansion. It's got a ton of ships to choose from. And you start with a tier 1 ship, then you can upgrade tier 2 and tier 3, and all of those ships are pre-painted, which is great. They all have their own special abilities. Excuse me. And they all offer differing strategies for what you can do. A lot of this game is finding the best ways to mitigate the dice rolls to be so that they are the most in your favor as possible. And on top of that, you just never know how the universe is going to expand. You can be cautious and scan a sector, the next sector over, and lay it out. That way you can see what you're jumping into, or you can do a blind jump and just jump into the next sector, which will result possibly in you jumping into a sun and exploding. If you die, no big deal. You respawn the next round with a little bit of damage if you're playing by the expansion rules, and that is the penalty for dying. Basically, you also lose your cargo and stuff like that, which kind of sucks. But you can attack other players. You can attack the NPCs. There's a police officer version of an NPC that will hunt you down if you start doing too much of that. And also, you'll gain bounties for doing that. And so then other players can hunt you down and try to get the bounty that you have put on yourself. So many different things going on in this game. Fantastic components, metal coins for the money. That's Zaya, Legends of a Drift System with the expansion Embers of a Forsaken Star. My number 7 with 24 hours. So my number 6 is Pandemic Legacy Season 1 with 27 hours. Now this was my number 7 on my individual plays list the last time I did that back in January. And this one has continued to be a favorite. Now I finished Season 1. Okay, this is a legacy game for those who aren't aware, which means that you play through it, and when you get to the end of the story, you're pretty much done. It is over. That's it. You've been changing the board game throughout the play, and it is pretty much over. You can't play it anymore. However, after beating it with my wife, or I shouldn't say beating it, we did pretty poorly, but I played through it with my wife. One of my game groups wanted to play it, so we have purchased a second copy of the game, and now that game group and I are playing through it. And so that's how we've gotten up to 27 hours with this game. So in Pandemic Legacy, it takes the pandemic system. So you've got up to 4 characters playing the game, and you are battling against 4 diseases that are ravaging the world, basically. Now, very quickly in Pandemic Legacy, that changes a little bit. The story starts to evolve. Different things start happening with the diseases, and it throws a new wrinkle at you almost every single game. You play through 12 months starting in January, ending in December, and if you lose a month, you play that month again. If you lose it again, you move on to the next month. If you beat a month, then you automatically move to the next month. And there's a deck of cards called the Legacy deck that you work your way through every month. And on there, it'll have new bits of the story. You might unlock new characters. You might unlock new special abilities, all kinds of different stuff. And I really have to be careful how much I say about it because I don't want to spoil the game for anybody that hasn't played it yet. It is a very compelling game. It's currently number 1 on Board Game Geek. I absolutely love this game. It definitely is one of the greatest board gaming experiences I've ever had. And the second time through, I kind of am stepping back from some of the decisions because I still remember where some of these decisions will lead us, and I'm letting the group kind of decide what we're going to do. And it's a lot of fun for me as a second-time player watching them make certain decisions that are either going to lead to fantastic results or possibly disastrous results at a certain point in the game. So that is my number 6 with 27 hours, Pandemic Legacy Season 1. My number 5 is Star Wars Imperial Assault. Now, this is a game that I've got 28 hours playing this one, and this showed up at number 10 on the individual plays list. This is a game that has really fallen off a little bit for me. I have not played it much recently, and it's because I found with the campaign, two things with the campaign. It has a bit of a runaway leader problem, it seems. It once one side or the other starts to rattle off a couple of wins, it becomes much more difficult for the losing side to manage to catch back up. And over the course of a campaign, that can be really frustrating because it's a fairly lengthy campaign. On top of that, the other thing I've found is that the campaign can be very fiddly to keep up with, especially if you want to try to do more than one campaign at a time. So because of that, the campaign has fallen off. Then I did find that the 1 versus 1, the skirmish mode, is a lot of fun. And I really enjoy that, but my wife doesn't enjoy the skirmish mode at all. She doesn't enjoy this game, basically. And then for my groups, it's always more than it's like 4 of us. You know what I mean? It's not one-on-one, hardly at all. And because of that, it's hard to bring out skirmish mode there. And instead it becomes, we're going to play something else. Because we tried the campaign, we got through like 6 games of the campaign, and it just became kind of, ugh. The reason I'm holding on to this game is I have high hopes for the app that's coming out. Supposedly, Final Fantasy. Fantasy Flight Games says they're still working on the app. They've been working on it for about 2 years now. And this app is supposed to turn Star Wars Imperial Assault into a fully cooperative game. They already did an app similar to that for Descent, and it has been very, very popular. As far as I can tell, Descent has only gained popularity by becoming a fully cooperative game. And I'm hoping that will be the case with Imperial Assault. If they did get a app out that did that and that worked well, I can see myself beginning to buy expansions again for it. I never bought any of the actual big box expansions. I only bought the individual character packs. But that would be really fantastic if they could get that app working to such a way that it could keep up with most of the bookkeeping for a campaign, and it would be a cooperative campaign and therefore a solo campaign. All of that stuff would really regain my interest in Imperial Assault. So I've been holding on to it for those purposes, and I have really high hopes for that. And so we'll see what happens whenever that app finally comes out. And like I said, they've been working on it for about 2 years, so hopefully any time now. A lot of people kind of expected it to be announced this convention season, and they just said they're still working on it, they promise. So we'll see what happens. But that is Star Wars Imperial Assault, my number 5 with 28 hours. Okay, so number 4 is regular Pandemic. Pandemic Vanilla, just a plain Pandemic game with 31 hours. This is my number 2 on my individual plays list, and it's just an absolute classic. Always fun, a great game to bring others into the hobby with. It's obviously a cooperative game just like Pandemic Legacy is, and it is, I feel like, simple to teach, simple to learn. There's not a whole lot going on, and adding into that the fact that everybody's cooperating really helps, so you can kind of coach people while you're playing. But it is a very difficult game if you set it, depending on what difficulty you set it at. And there's 3 standard difficulties, but you can kind of mess with that in other ways as well. This is a game that the wife and I have been playing since we got married. This was actually, the first time we played this was on our honeymoon, and it became an instant classic for us. Absolutely love this game. It is not my number 1 favorite game of all time, but it will always be one of my favorite games of all time. So there's not really much else to say about it other than you really, if you are in the board game hobby, here's what I can say about it. If what's attracted you into the board game hobby is games with miniatures, like the Dungeons and Dragons Adventure System games, or Mansions of Madness, or Imperial Assault, Mechs Vs Minions. These games are these minis that are flashy and cool looking and are a lot of fun. And you look at Pandemic, you see little pawns and cubes. And when I first started getting into the hobby, I wanted nothing to do with it. I thought it looked boring. I thought it looked dumb. Didn't want to touch it. And finally, I just kept hearing people talk about it and talk about it and talk about it. And I was like, you know what? There must be something to this. I need to give it a shot. And you can see it immediately became one of our favorite games of all time. On our honeymoon, I think we played it like 20 times. So it absolutely is worth taking the chance. It's only, I think it's like a $20 to $30 game at retail. It's worth taking the shot to see if you like it. You can always trade it away if you don't, but I have a feeling that most people who try this game, as long as you like cooperative games, that obviously is a key there. If you like cooperative games, give this one a shot. It is the penultimate cooperative game in my opinion. It is the one that really just kind of sets the standard in terms of skill and luck, that intersection where those two meet, because you're drawing cards, which is the luck part, but you're also mitigating that with how you weigh where you should go on the board, which diseases you should treat, where you should spend your time, what is, you might see, okay, this outbreak is probably going to happen over here, but it's worth leaving that alone for now so that we can go over here and cure this disease. And these kind of decisions that you weigh while you're playing are really what make this game fantastic. That's Pandemic, my number 4 most played game with 31 hours. My number 3 most played game of all time has 41 total hours. This was my number 4 on the most individual plays list, and this is Dead of Winter. Dead of Winter is a zombie game that feels like a zombie TV show where the zombies are there, they're in the backdrop though, and really it's more about the interaction between the players. Some of my absolute favorite gaming memories have come from trying to suss out who the traitor is. If there's a traitor, maybe nobody's a traitor, but maybe this guy's a traitor. He sure is acting suspicious, but maybe that's just because of the personality quirk he's got based on his individual mission. You have a main mission for the game, and then every player has an individual mission. It's entirely possible, even likely, that no one's a traitor. They just have some relatively selfish personal missions, like they have to stockpile food or something like that in their hand and not share it with everybody else. Because of that, you're constantly wondering who's a traitor, if there's a traitor. You are going to the different areas on the board, trying to help each other not get bitten. But there's so much danger just moving from the colony to somewhere else. If you move without burning gasoline, meaning you don't take a vehicle, you've got to roll a red die to see if you get bitten. If you get bitten, instant death, just like that. Nothing else said. And if you go somewhere where there's another survivor, if that's where you were going when you got bitten, you might end up spreading that bite to them. And so there's these different decisions like that. And then there's a deck of crossroad cards where one player is looking at this card and watching what you're doing. And if you trigger whatever the trigger is at the top of the card, then everything stops. An event occurs. And usually a decision has to be made. And that decision can lead to some interesting results as well. It has some really great artwork. It's got a really great expansion that I don't have, but I have played, called the Last Night? Oh man, what's it called? The Long Night. That's the name of the expansion. Dead of Winter, The Long Night. And it adds a Resident Evil style set of bad guys. It adds a Raiders style of bad guys. And then lots more characters, lots more crossroad cards, other locations. Lots of cool extra stuff in there. And The Long Night, by the way, can be played by itself. It does not need the base game to play it. So, not much else to say about Dead of Winter. It's definitely one everyone should give a shot, I feel like. Even people who don't like cooperative games, because of the fact that it may not be a cooperative game when you play. But that's Dead of Winter with 41 hours. Moving on to my number 2 most played game. This one has 45 hours. This is my number 5 on my individual plays list, and it is Thunderstone Advance. Now, this is another one that we have kind of stopped playing, but this one is responsible on its own for creating my second game group that I go to. I was at training, away from home at training, and I was there with three or four other people from work, and managed to convince over the course of that week to get 3 of them to play this game with me. And in doing so, once we got done with that training, we had to keep getting together. And so Thunderstone Advance was the go-to game for a long time. I've since managed to get them to start branching out a little bit, finding other games to play and enjoying and stuff. And that's the group that I'm currently going through Pandemic Legacy Season 1 with. Thunderstone Advance is a deck building game at its core. I mean, that is basically what it is. There's very few other mechanisms in the game, but it adds to it. There's a dungeon row at the top of the board where monsters are coming across, and you're fighting those monsters and getting victory points for defeating the monsters. And then you can choose to either go to the dungeon or go to the village. And in the village, there is a random village set up every time. In the village, you may find villagers to hire. You will find heroes to hire, but which ones you find to hire are different every game. There's 4 heroes that'll be there waiting to be hired. There's items, there's weapons, there's spells, lots of different stuff in the village for you to consider. And it's just it always has a different strategy that you can go with based on what's happening there. Now, here's the cool thing. Thunderstone Advance is the 2nd edition of Thunderstone. Thunderstone Quest is the 3rd edition. And it has not come out yet, but the Kickstarter happened about 6 or 7 months ago, and it'll be coming out here in the next few months as well. Very excited to give this one a shot. I am hearing really good things about it. And I almost backed it on Kickstarter, ended up going with, I think I went from Thunderstone Quest to backing Rising Sun, and then I canceled my Rising Sun again and backed Gloomhaven. I think is the way that ended up going. Which, by the way, is in the mail right now. It should be here in a few days. So Thunderstone is forever going to be one of those games that I look back fondly. However, when Quest comes out, it may fully replace Advance. I may never play Advance again. But in the meantime, Advance has gotten, like I said, 45 hours of playtime, and it's going to stay up on my most played list for a long time. It'll be a while before it actually ever drops off. And yeah, Thunderstone Advance, my number 2 most played game with 45 hours. And finally, my number 1 most played game was number 13 on the individual plays list, but number 1 on my favorite games list, and that is Mage Knight, the board game. Mage Knight, the board game, is an epic, sprawling game. Solo takes me minimum 2 hours to play. And when I introduce it, I never introduce it to a new person more than 1 new person at a time. Playing 2 players with a new person on one of the shorter scenarios took us about 3 hours. It absolutely is a lengthy game, but it's so worth it. The payoff is fantastic. I believe I said 50 hours is how many hours I've spent playing this game. And basically you are this massively powerful Mage Knight, as the title may suggest. And you show up on this board, and it's a modular board. You set up the tile deck based on what mission you're going on. And then as you explore, you pull tiles out, and there's all different things that can show up on the tiles. You have rampaging enemies that will attack you if you move near them, or you can attack them, either way. You have keeps, you have wizard towers, you have monasteries. You also have a reputation track that you have to keep track of your reputation, which will help or hinder your interaction with villagers and other townsfolk and the monasteries and stuff. You can decide at the monastery that you're going to just interact with them, have them heal you, or you can try to burn the monastery to the ground and steal the treasures that they are protecting there. There's massively powerful artifacts in the game that you add to your deck. Oh, it's a deck building game, by the way. But unlike most deck building games, like Thunderstone or Star Realms, where you're rapidly, churning through your deck over and over and over again, in Mage Knight, you're only going to go through your deck a couple times, 3 times a game or so. or actually I guess you would go through it in a standard length game that is 3 days, 3 days and 3 nights. You'll go through your deck once during a day, once during a night, so 6 times total. So you're constantly adding stuff in there. You're collecting gems that help you harness the power of mana, or I guess technically you're gathering mana crystals. That's what they are. So it actually is mana crystals, mana tokens. You're, like I said, fighting these enemies. Some of these enemies are really powerful. When you end up finding a city, that city is usually going to be very well guarded, and you're going to have really gotten your deck together in honed together a fantastic deck of cards to really be able to effectively take down that city without taking on a whole lot of wounds in the process. There is a way to play where you can play player versus player combat. I never play with that rule. If I have more than one person playing, we play that, it's not cooperatively, but where we don't fight each other. So we're keeping score. We're each trying to win. We could still, like if you take a keep, then that keep is yours. But we play that, if you move off the keep, somebody else can end up trying to take that keep from you if they fight the guards that you've, left behind there. Every time I play the game, it feels like a new adventure. It feels like, while I am learning the cards and honing my strategy, every time it feels like a new experience. And I absolutely love this game. I don't see it leaving my top 3 favorite games anytime soon. I don't see it leaving this list anytime soon. It will forever be there. And yeah, that is Mage Knight, the board game. An absolutely fantastic game from Vlad, whose name I'm sure I butcher every time I say it, but he has created a game that will forever be one of the best games of all time. Mage Knight, the board game, 50 hours of play, my number 1 most played game. So there we have it. Those are my most played games by number of hours played. I hope you enjoyed this video and this video series. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. As I mentioned at the beginning, if you like any of these games you see, please go down in the description below and you can purchase them from a link in that description, and a little bit of the funds that you spend on those games will help this channel as well. If you have any questions or comments, leave those in the comments section below. I'd love to hear what your favorite games or most played games are. And until next time, if you're bored online, board offline.